My name is Trami. I'm with Chopsticks Alley, and welcome to Chopsticks Alley Talk Live. And I have my co-host today.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Chung, your co-host and lifestyle editor here at Chopsticks Alley. Don't forget to check out our articles online at chopsticksalley.com. And we recently had the release of our new addition to Chopsticks Alley, which is podcast. So you can go ahead and go to soundcloud.com/Chopsticks Alley to listen to our first episode talking about the effects of the Vietnam War for the next generations.
And our very important topic today is about April 30th. And we have invited a special guest, Andrew Lam, who is an author, and he's going to help us with our topic of discussion today. Welcome, Andrew.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Of course, we'd love to have you, and you drove all the way from Berkeley here to see us.
So Andrew is the current web editor of New America Media. He's a journalist and story writer. In 2005, he published a collection of essays, Perfume Dreams, Reflections on the Vietnamese Diaspora, talking about the problem of identity as a Vietnamese living in the U.S. He receives the PEN Open Book Award, and he was an 8 years regular contributor for NPR, National Public Radio's. And also, if you read the Huffington Post, he also regularly contributes to it. I'm like tongue-tied all over today.
It's okay, that was a lot. You did good.
A lot. Sorry
you did
about
good.
that.
I hope I did you justice, because we're very excited to have you today.
Thank you.
Yes, and during our research on this topic for today, your article in Huffington Post came up.
Oh, wow.
And that's how we were like, let's invite Andrew Lam, who's an expert on this topic, we think. So our first question for you is basically, if you could describe for those of us who were too young or were not born yet, what happened exactly on April 30th, 1975?
Well, since I was old enough to remember his historical moment, I can tell you that it was the end of the war. Saigon fell on April 30th, 1975. Tanks rolled into Saigon, and the last president of South Vietnam went on radio and said, we are defeated and the communist government of Hanoi won. And that was the moment in which massive number of people began to take boats out to sea, and you had an enormous amount of helicopters flying from rooftop to rooftop, picking up people, especially at that famous scene of behind the U.S. Embassy. It was a residential building where people were climbing on top of that staircase trying to get to the helicopters, which then ferried people out to waiting American ships. Mm-hmm. So that was it's very significant and symbolic of the end, right? People panicking, climbing over embassies, trying to escape. And of course, that was the date that began the Vietnamese diaspora in America. And in fact, in a strange way, it's the birth date of Vietnamese American history.
And that's why this April 30th, there's so many ways to celebrate or mourn this day, right? It's a day of many meanings.
It's a day of many meanings. In Vietnam, it's celebrated. It's more of like a celebration. It's considered Victory Day, and it's called Ngày Chiến Thắng, which translates to Victory Day. It's a public holiday, and it basically celebrates when the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese troops captured Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City. Now here in America, in the Vietnamese communities here, particularly in San Jose, for instance, we celebrate it more as a day of remembrance, a day of mourning for those for families or lives that were lost.
And the name, for example, is National Day of Shame or National Day of Resentment, Ngày Quốc Nhục, Ngày Quốc Hận. So
we also have Ngày Mất Nước,
Ngày Mất Nước, losing the country.
You lose the country.
So the terms are much stronger. It carries than a lot of.
And it's a day of grief for many people.
And unlike many of the other events in the Vietnamese community, you won't see concerts. You won't see anything really celebratory during Black April.
Yeah. So let's talk about Black April, as it's called. How do you feel about black versus white?
Well, I have to say that the term black is a translation of Ngày Mất Nước, or so it's something is lost in the translation, because originally, as someone who was 11 when he got here at the end of the war, And I remember the first year in 1976 when we got to City Hall in San Francisco, and I was among those people waving the South Vietnamese flag and say, return my country to me, that sort of thing. And we were wearing white headband. We were like in funeral mourning of the loss, right?
Right.
And so we didn't have a Black April then. We were speaking mostly in Vietnamese, and we were saying "Ngày mất nước," and but that translated into English, Black April, and then it carries on this significance of loss.
So I think we have a question.
We have an audience question. Carolyn asks, why is this day called Black April and not White April? Doesn't the color white symbolize death and loss in Vietnamese culture?
Precisely, because for Vietnamese funerals, it's white.
Yeah, like I say, we wore white headband, and that's why I say the translation is lost because it doesn't have that reference point. Because in English, black means mourning rather than white, and that's why the translation is a little bit off. But then it means more for people who don't have that reference point.
Well, do you think it was translated to Black April so that it wouldn't cause confusion for white Americans? Because Americans associate black with, with mourning funerals.
Right. And it's for non-Vietnamese as well to understand the meaning of that day. But that's why for a native speaker, it doesn't have the same kind of significance than that. But I would also say that in Vietnam, they don't just say ngày, they have another word for it as well. Say ngày giải phóng.
Yes,
National
Independence Day.
Liberation Day.
Right, yeah.
So I find it significant because so many years have passed, 42 years to be exact. And so then everyone has now their own interpretation.
Yeah. From our research, we found that Viet Thanh Nguyen, who recently wrote The Sympathizer and won the Pulitzer Prize, his perspective is, although white is the color of mourning of Vietnamese society, calling this day White April would likely offend or at least confuse white Americans. If it was named White April, however, through this logic, if we are concerned with offending white folks, why are we not concerned with offending black folks when we named it Black April?
Yeah, it's problematic in many ways.
Yes,
right? And if I may, I'll read a little passage from Perfume Dreams in which I actually talk about the dilemma of the meaning of the day. Okay, it's very quick. Flipping through my United States passport as if it were a comic book, the customs man at the Noi Bai airport near Hanoi appeared curious. Brother, when did you leave Vietnam? 2 days before National Defeat Day, I said, without thinking. It was an exile's expression, not his. God, when did this happen? Asked the man in a comic and exaggerated tone. The 30th of April 1975, I offered. But brother, he smiled, don't you mean National Liberation Day? If this conversation had occurred a decade earlier, the difference would have created a dangerous gap between the Vietnamese and the returning Vietnamese American. But this has happened a couple decades after the war had ended, when the walls were down, the borders worse, and as I studied the smiling young official, it occurred to me that there was something about this moment, an epiphany. Yes, I suppose I do mean Liberation Day, I said. But not everyone remembers the date with a smile. It marked Vietnamese diaspora, both people, refugees.
So, and thank you very much for sharing that. I think it makes our conversation today very meaningful because there are so many meanings behind it, right? Yeah.
And so many different kind of experiences. Yeah. And instead of detracting them, we should acknowledge all of them.
That's right. Yeah. In his book, Perfume Dreams, Andrew reflects on the meanings of the Vietnam War to the Vietnamese people themselves. And so he picks a lot of, he picks with searing honesty at the roots of his doubleness and parents' longing for a homeland that no longer exists. And so with Andrew, I remember reading your books East Meets West, Birds of Paradise Lost, in my Vietnamese American class in San Francisco State University. And so for a young Vietnamese American who didn't live through the war and didn't have to experience that myself, like reading the books and getting that different perspective really helped me understand what the Vietnam War was and how it affects my generation today. So thank you for that. And if you haven't had a chance to read his books, definitely do check them out. It's a great read.
Thank you.
Yes, but here's a side I'd like to offer. war. So being playing devil's advocate, right?
Yeah.
So I've asked organizers of different April 30th events, like why are they still wearing black? Are they open to wearing white, for example? What if we just stay true to our roots, which white means death, white means mourning.
Right.
And the answer I got was actually a surprising one for me. It was because, well, we already have a bunch of black Aozai made, and we just don't want to make new ones.
That's a practical answer.
It's a practical answer. However, I have conflicts with that because I feel that if you're going to put an event together, it is important to put all your efforts into it, right? And not just out of
you can't just do it to do it.
Right.
It's a very important day.
But another observation would be this. Over time, that date begins to lose significance over the new generation, both here and Vietnam.
Right.
I wrote about it 2 years ago when it was a big date, 40 years anniversary of the end of the war. And Vietnam itself, in the past, had paraded this victory, both in Hanoi and Saigon, in long, long parades.
It's like Independence Day.
Right. But on that day, 2 years ago, it was restricted to half a mile and going around the Dinh Độc Lập, Independence Palace, because it didn't want to get into conflicting traffic, and also there was a lot of protests against the government, so they didn't want media to cover it. And there were all these guys checking on their iPhone trying to figure out when it's going to be done, meaning that the date itself become less and less significant to them. And they were parading across places like Starbucks and McDonald's and Tiger Beers and Toyota, meaning that what is exactly that victory now for Vietnam? Because what did they gain and what did they lose? And in Vietnam, they are also questioning that the way we are asking that in this country. Because are we really exiled? Considering that we are investing heavily in Vietnam, including Vietnamese American, I know a bunch of people gone back and opening business in Vietnam. So did we really lose a country anymore, or did we gain a new one, right? So all of this is changing as history is shifting.
And I think it's only changing in the mind of the younger people, I want to say, but for those who are 60 or above, for them it hasn't changed. And for them it's still a day of mourning and it's a day of sadness. And at these April 30th events, the youth are the ones that are creating the event in honor of the elders. And that sometimes the elders are not very forgiving to when the youth are trying to do something different. They're trying to give a positive spin to it. Like, we have hope now, things are positive for us. They get offended. So it ties the hands of the youth a lot.
Well, I think in a way you need to honor the past, but you also acknowledge the reality of the present.
By moving forward. Like I always say, it's important. I think it's important for younger generations to acknowledge this part of their history, not to be bitter, but to respect it. And like you said, to honor the past by celebrating these events or being part of these events and learning from it, and then also moving forward by figuring out, okay, what were the mistakes made? How can I learn from it and continue moving on, positively contributing to the community I live in?
I would say this. I actually texted a couple of friends who actually do work in Vietnam in the human trafficking issues. And one of them said, basically, I don't really have a strong opinion about it anymore. I'd rather people do something about human trafficking in Vietnam, help with the poor, do charity work, because that will give significance to the meaning of that date more than like talking about the date and then not doing anything.
That's a great idea. So maybe on April 30th, instead of just feeling bad, do something positive instead for the Vietnamese community.
Here or in Vietnam.
Exactly.
Well, I think
that's a great idea.
Let's look at the perspective of the older generations, right? After the Vietnam War, 2 million people fled their countries. They lost everything that they had. They lost their loved ones. They risked their lives in order to go to the Sea of Freedom, as they call it. And so I think for a lot of the older generations, the memories of the Vietnam War are still very much alive for our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles. And so I can definitely understand, for them, when Black April comes around, all these memories of like oppression, of death, of communism.
And loss of a life, right? So we're not talking about just losing things, house, money, but you were somebody in society, and now you come to America, you don't speak the language, you're treated like you're just, leeches off of the country and you're discriminated against. I mean, it's a loss of not just things, but also your standing in society. That's huge.
It's a spiritual amputation, I call it, because not only is it difficult to move from one place to another, but for Vietnamese, because we didn't have a tradition of leaving, like say the Chinese or the Indians, we were very sedentary people. And so for
we defeated many conquerors.
You know, the Vietnamese word for country is đất nước.
You know, earth and water.
Earth and water. And when you combine earth and water, what do you get?
Land.
Dirt? No, I don't know.
Oh my gosh,
I don't know. Help us out here.
Mud, right?
Mud.
But where do you find mud?
Help us out.
In the rice field.
Gotcha.
Okay.
In the rice field, and the rice field is the seed of Vietnamese soul, right? Sống chất có nước có đất, you know. So you live for the land, and so that amputation is to take away everything, you know, the cyclical life, you know. Even like in the rural, people still bury the dead in the rice field, and when you're born, the umbilical cord is buried in the land as a way to register your connection to earth. So to be able to move or be forced to move overseas is not just, you know, a disruption and, you know, economic problem, but it's a spiritual problem.
Wow. So Trami, for those of us who have never attended a Black April event, can you explain to us a little bit more on, you know, what happens during this event? What do people wear? What do people do throughout the evening?
Sure. Well, to be honest, I've actually never attended one, but I've watched some YouTube video clips of it. And so what happens is everyone wears black, and there's in the front they set up bàn thờ, so it's like a shrine, and they have photographs of generals, you know, Vietnamese important figures in the military who have been lost.
Yeah.
And so, and then they also mourn for boat people who died at sea. And so that's, I would say 85% of the event is about that. Then about 15% is now the youth are trying to now, you know, insert their beliefs, which is now we're in America, we're successful, we're doing better. I'm hoping that in the future it would be more 50-50 or, you know, more on the positive spin. And like you say, I think it's a wonderful way to celebrate is to do positive things versus just be sad about that, you know?
So we wanted to move on to our next topic of discussion, which is also in relating to Black April. It's the Vietnam flag. So recently in this community of San Jose, there was a controversy about a group of individuals who wanted to publicly present the Vietnam, the red flag, which is
with the star. So the communist current internationally recognized flag of Vietnam.
Right.
Yeah. And so we wanted to discuss, you know, the pros and cons of banning the current day Vietnam flag and whether or not we should even consider banning it.
What do you think?
Well, you know, I don't know if that's gonna fly, excuse the pun, but I think because foreign relations with a recognized country will require, you know, federal recognition of the flag. But there are private area where you can definitely ban it, like, you know, Little Saigon or, you know, certain places where there is some kind of leeway. But I don't think the city itself will ban a flag.
Right.
Plus, banning a flag is very different than, say, lobbying to change the way in which Vietnam arrests bloggers in Vietnam or something like that.
Yeah.
I'd rather that the community's energy focus on more significant shift in policies regarding Vietnam than symbolic ones where you feel personally satisfied, but actually has no significance in outcome.
Anything. I agree with you completely. And on the flip side, I also think the reason we came to America is for freedom.
Right.
Freedom to fly our flag, freedom to do whatever. So when we are imposing this belief, you know, to say you are not allowed to fly your flag, what message are we sending, right? So me saying that does not mean I support the communists, right? Because I think with the Vietnamese community, sometimes when we have opposing views, we get accused of being communist. I'm not a communist.
Well, my father, I will say this, my fatherhood and I are polar opposite in politics, but he was the first man to teach me the principle of democracy. And he say, in democracy, you are allowed to have opposition. You're allowed to have opposed ideas, opposed values, and you can still exist. So when a community imposes dictatorship over what can be said or not said, a value can be had or not had, what it is doing is reflecting the value of the communist government, which is doing exactly the same thing in Vietnam.
That's correct. That's
And
exactly.
and so the question then is, if you're gonna be tyrannical over how your children should feel or how they should look at certain things, how are you going to really bring democracy back to Vietnam if you yourself cannot practice it?
Well said. Thank you very much. Because I agree. I think that people should be able to fly whatever flag they want.
Right.
If you don't want it in your front yard, you don't have to fly
Right.
it. But that's part of the democracy.
But I think it's also respect for your neighbors. Yes, you can have opposing views, but again, for Vietnamese Americans who had gone through the Vietnam War and had fled communism, when they see that flag, they're reminded of the oppression of communists and like everything that they had lost during that. So I think it's just out of respect that we should respect their decision to not want that flag publicly out in our communities,
Right.
especially here in San Jose where there's such a huge Vietnamese population.
Mm-hmm. So besides that, let's talk about healing. So how can we heal? I mean, I think Jen and I don't really have that much tie into the pain. We only see it in our parents. We only see it in our grandparents. You were a little bit older. Did you feel that you lost something, a childhood or something, and now how are you healing? How are you taking care of
Oh,
that?
I heal by these.
By writing.
This actually is a lot better than going to therapy. This book, for instance, the last one, Birds of Paradise Lost, took maybe 15 years to write.
15 years?
Yeah. I mean, over time, because I'm doing a bunch of different things, but because I'm trying to get to the whole grief of the community in different ways, right? And so in a way, each of us have different way of dealing with trauma. Everyone does. Like some people recover faster, some people can never recover from it. And so I think, for us, the process of healing begins with acknowledging of your own grief, and then begin to actually able to give narrative around it. Because so many people who are traumatized are robbed the second time by falling silent.
Yeah.
And when you fall silent, the grief is internalized.
Yeah.
And it actually transfer, not consciously, but subconsciously through the second generation. Sometimes it's translated into rage. Sometimes it translates into family domestic abuse and divorce and drinking. A lot of times,
And gambling.
And all these things that cannot be spoken become transferred through negative action. And so a lot of time when I go to universities and do reading, someone from the audience will come up and say, thank you for this book or other book, because with it I can talk to my mother about it. She never talked about it, but it opened up, and now I'm actually bridging to my mother through literature. And I said, you know what, that's really an amazing thing, because when I wrote all these things, it's just to heal myself.
Yes.
You know?
But you helped a lot of people along the
Yeah,
way.
it's really it's really a blessing.
Right. So then celebrating April 30th for our elders to be able to go out there and really express
Yeah.
their discontent is a way for them
Sure,
to heal,
sure,
right?
Right.
So we're just saying give room also for the youth to heal and learn.
Right.
And for them to not, because the reason Jen and I didn't go really is because we felt a disconnect with that day.
Yeah.
So maybe if we created an event that's appealing to both
Right.
generations, first, second, and also the immigrant generation, then more of us can come together and celebrate or also commemorate that day with the community.
Yeah, because we are here to absolutely respect our elders, and we, as members of the community, we're very interested in learning about the history and
Sure.
finding out how other ways we can positively contribute, like I mentioned earlier. And so I think it'd be better for everyone if we are just more open-minded and open-hearted about making these decisions.
It's very difficult in the sense that when a community suffers from grief and trauma, it tends to not hear, because there's only rage, and this only significant story is my loss, right? And so there has got to be a space to be created in which there is a way to share your story to each other, and you can hear and acknowledge that everyone's point of view is significant and valuable.
Yeah, that's great.
So I know that you are getting ready to publish a new book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, ready is not the right word. You know, I hold it on until I'm ready, right?
Yeah.
The next book, it's about love and loss, less about war, and about how love, lust, and sex and all this play out in individual lives, right? And still focus on Vietnamese American lives, but maybe second generation more than first.
So what's a unique twist that you're going to put on this? Because, you know, sex and love has always been written about already. So what is that spin?
Well, you know, I don't think it's that well written in Vietnamese American literature, because I would say that the first few books I wrote, it was written with the history of our peoples and our suffering in mind. So there was a kind of social obligation. But this next book, tentatively called Stories from the Edge of the Sea, it's really about one's own sexual identity, love and loss and heartbreak, and how it plays out in the context of history and the moment of California.
Yeah. Wow, I can't wait to read it. That sounds very exciting. Because you're right, in the Vietnamese culture, we don't talk about sex.
Yeah.
We don't write about sex.
Right.
You know, it's taboo almost. So you're bringing it to light. And maybe then we'll bring you back and we'll talk about all that exciting stuff.
Let's talk about sex, baby.
Yeah, right? But in the meantime, we have Birds of Paradise Lost.
We have Perfume Dreams, which is recently, not recently published, but is his most recent work.
And also award-winning, right?
Only one Academy Award.
Yeah.
That's my first, actually.
His first.
So this
his
is the
first
second one. East West is second book.
Eats West. See the
And
chopsticks?
for people who are interested in chopsticks and food, there's a lot of food and anime and pho. I wrote a whole section about pho.
I love it.
Yes.
The real, you know, from a Vietnamese, from the real Vietnamese perspective.
And my sister's favorite is actually Birds of Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
She also heard that in school.
But we want to thank you for coming today, and also our audience. And don't forget to tune into our podcast. We did this specific one to commemorate April 30th and the trauma of it all with 1.5 and second generation. And you can find us on SoundCloud.com. And then search Chopsticks Alley or type in Chopsticks Alley.
And don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on there. You can also like us on Instagram, where we post really fun pictures. So thank you again for all your support. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you at the next Chopsticks Alley Talk.
Yes, and we're going to be doing an art event pretty soon and kicking off our Kickstarter campaign. So tune in to chopsticksalley.com to sign up on our newsletter. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.